might not be able to afford his favorite beverage next year. If Congress fails to pass a farm bill renewing federal support for agriculture programs, the country's milk prices could double to as much as $8 a gallon. That's because the government will be forced to revert to a 1949 dairy price subsidy that requires the Agriculture Department to buy milk at inflated prices. Vincent Smith, a professor of agriculture at Montana State University, told the New York Times that similar to the current fiscal cliff, the 63-year-old farm law was left on the books as an incentive intended to scare lawmakers into action with the prospect of higher support prices for milk and other agricultural products. Actually allowing it to go into effect could be disastrous. Farmers would rush to sell dairy to the government at higher prices, limiting consumer supply, leading to higher prices in stores and less milk for manufacturing products like butter, yogurt, and cheese, which could have the makers of those products looking for cheaper alternatives like imported milk from New Zealand. Now, how did we get here? It's the same old story. Republicans are refusing to act. The Senate passed its own bipartisan 10-year farm bill in June. House Republicans haven't even brought a competing proposal to the floor for a vote. I'm joined by David K. Johnston, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author of the fine print, and I assume, lover of milk. Brother Johnston, if we go over the dairy cliff, would there be any doubt as to who is to blame? We ain't got to figure out real deeply who is at fault here.
No, it's very clear who's at fault. We have a group within the Republicans, and Boehner has seen he can't control them, who dogma trumps everything else. And I think, Eric, that this is a foretelling of what we're going to see for the next 2 years. A group in the Republican Party who do not care about anything but their perspective and making sure that their idea of how things should be done gets done or nothing gets done.
Yeah, they're curdling the milk to be sure. But explain to us how food stamps factor into this. This is one of the most ludicrous and tragic elements of this entire story.
Well, statistically, every 50th person you pass on the street is living on no income at all except food stamps because there are not jobs for those people. They're not slackers. They're not people who are indolent or have messed up their lives. They can't find a job because we don't have the jobs. So we now have a situation in which the food stamp budget has exploded, as it is supposed to when you have this kind of a severe economic downturn. And the Republicans just simply don't believe that people who are long-term unemployed and their children should be able to get food through a government program.
Right. So they are afraid again.
So if they can cut,
right. Go ahead.
So they want to cut the agriculture. They want to cut the agriculture budget. They want to reduce food stamps. And if milk prices are part of this, then so be it.
Well, see, that's the point. The paranoid view here is that everybody is on the dole trying to get over, and as a result of that, we've got to tamp down on all these excesses. But what ends up happening is it redounds negatively to the middle class and to working poor and poor people, and they get messed up in the process.
Well, this can actually make the deficit worse, although in a relatively small way. The fact is supermarkets are not going to be able to sell milk at $8 a gallon. The government will buy it at that price, or a much higher price than it's paying now, under the 1949 law, back when cows were milked by hand instead of machines.
Right.
And it will then have to sell that milk at a loss.
Yeah, and that selling it at a loss, of course, is going to do tremendous damage to that industry. What would the real-world impact of a price hike like this be?
Well, if milk actually went up that much, you'd see a huge change in the dietary habits of Americans, particularly children. People would simply be drinking water or, much worse, soda. Remember, one of the biggest problems, you have all these sugary drinks that people are letting their children have in schools have been letting children have.
Right.
And you would see this big shift away from milk towards those kinds of drinks. But the real underlying story here, I think the important one, is about how we are seeing the way the Republicans are likely to behave for the next 2 years. I think this is going to turn out to be an extraordinarily difficult and weird and unusual period in American history.
David K. Johnston, thank you so much for milking the story to its full extent. It's a